Hello, everyone. I'm here with SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce. Thank you so much for joining us for this.
Pomp, it's great to be here. I have to, of course, start with my disclaimer that the views that I represent are my own views, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your views. You've been very vocal about some of your views around crypto. And I think one of the big questions that everyone has right now is crypto is one of many things that a regulator like the SEC is focused on. Can you help us just get kind of a level set in terms of the importance of crypto in the body of work that you and your fellow commissioners do on a day-to-day basis, and kind of how you view, the maybe crypto versus traditional financial markets, or anything else you may be focused on?
So, I mean, that's a great question to start with, just because I think sometimes people in the crypto space think that we spend all of our time thinking about crypto. In reality, it's a quite small sliver of what we do. I mean, regulating the capital, we're one of two regulators of the capital markets at the federal level in the United States. And so you've got a huge swath of things to spend time on. Now, that said, I think as crypto has gotten more attention from retail investors and institutional investors, and just from the mainstream media and from politicians, we're spending more time thinking about it. And I would argue we're probably spending a disproportionate amount of time given the size of the asset class. Although, that said, I think there's some unique and interesting regulatory issues that we do have to get worked out, and it would be better to do that earlier rather than later. Now, our new chair, Chair Gensler, has come in, and I think when any new chairman comes into the SEC, he brings a big package of agenda items that he wants to work out and work on, have the staff work on. So he's working on getting that agenda going. I think crypto will be part of it, but it was not part of the initial regulatory agenda that his office put out, that the SEC put out earlier this year. So I'm hopeful that we can get crypto onto that agenda.
Got it. And so would it be fair to read into the idea that not having crypto on the agenda means that it's just not a focus? Or is there some other way for us to kind of look at whether it is listed or it's not listed on that agenda? How should people kind of take away how the SEC or some of the individual commissioners view crypto as an industry compared to those other things that you guys are focused on?
Well, I think one thing to bear in mind is that the regulatory agenda really does deal with rules. So it's a question of are we working on a rule that relates directly to crypto? And it wasn't on the list of rules. That doesn't mean that there's not work going on in other parts of the commission. So, of course, in enforcement, there could well be work going on related to crypto. There certainly has been in the past. And then we also have a FinHub, which is an office that deals with innovation of all kinds, financial technology of all kinds. And the staff in that office are spending quite a bit of their time dealing with crypto issues, and working with international regulators and other regulators at the federal level here in the United States, and trying to do outreach with innovators themselves who are working in crypto. So there's a lot going on there. Now, I think every commissioner has his or her own set of priorities, and I think I'd like to get my fellow commissioners to spend a bit more time thinking about crypto, so that we could do something sort of constructive in this space to provide more clarity, which is what I think is really needed.
I'm a little shy to ask the question this way, but if you were to kind of think through or speculate on maybe some of the other commissioners and their viewpoint on crypto, the fact that they're not spending maybe as much time as you are, is that something because the industry is smaller? Maybe there's not as many of the large institutions on Wall Street that have been participating historically. Is it just not a personal interest? Like, what do you think is kind of driving maybe the lack of interest or the lack of attention to it versus maybe some of the other issues on the agenda?
Well, and I certainly don't want to speak for my fellow commissioners, and they're all very knowledgeable about a whole range of issues, and I think they're all interested in, based on things I've heard them say publicly. I think they're all interested in crypto issues. So I don't want to suggest otherwise. I just think that there are a lot of really pressing issues on everyone's agenda. For example, I'm thinking a lot about how does the economy come out of COVID-19 and reopen, and how do businesses that really struggled to make it through that period, how do they keep their doors open and grow and get their clientele back? So that's something that's really on my mind. And everyone has different, the former acting chair Lee, has spent a lot of time thinking about climate change. So everyone has different issues, but I think people, especially as the asset class has grown, people are spending more time thinking about it here at the commission.
Got it. One of the topics that definitely is top of mind for people in the crypto industry is the Bitcoin ETF. There's been a slew of various applications that have been put in over the last kind of 6 to 9 months, and the SEC has continued to kind of push forward those applications and kind of not make a decision or delay the decisions, or outright reject some of them. Any color or insight that you could provide on the ETF situation, and maybe some more elaboration on your recent comments that in your opinion, it sounds like the ETF should have been approved a while ago, and the argument against it is kind of fading away.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that I would never have imagined that I would be in this situation where we would not yet have approved one, and other countries are moving ahead. We now have a good example in Canada, which not only has a Bitcoin ETF, but also one based on Ether. And so I think we can take lessons from the experiences that foreign countries have had. Obviously, our regulatory structure is different here, and so we have to apply our own set of rules. But as I laid out in my initial dissent on the first Bitcoin exchange traded product that I thought we should have approved, I mean, I think we are applying a different set of standards to this asset, to this type of exchange traded product than we have to other similar types of exchange traded products. Um, I think the staff is, they've laid out in their disapprovals some of the things that they're looking at, and they are working hard to, and working with people in the industry who are trying to get these things approved. They're sorting through data and looking at the data from different angles. But the industry has matured quite a bit, and as you have more institutional players involved, there's a natural maturing of the industry that I think has addressed some of the concerns that were underneath the initial disapproval. So I'm certainly hopeful that we can recognize that there is that maturity there, and also the fact that there's a lot happening. People are looking for other ways to get access to Bitcoin, and my question is, wouldn't we rather have an option for people to access it through our regulated markets? I think a lot of people in the Bitcoin world might prefer that we didn't, but I think it's typical for us to at least want to have that option out there for people, if people want it, and then the products can survive or not survive depending on whether there's investor demand.
Yeah, I've always been very interested how much it matters the investors that are seeking exposure to Bitcoin via maybe other listed or traded products. So there's some other trust type products out there. There's public companies now that are starting to put on their balance sheet, and some investors are buying the stocks that appears for exposure there. Does that have any kind of play into the decisions that are made internally at the regulatory body? Or how should people think about seeing an increase in what appears to be demand for exposure to the asset and the ETF decision? Is there any relationship there?
Well, it's certainly a relationship that I see, and I mean, I think we have to ask that question: Are retail investors being served well by not having this option? But I think one of the problems with the way the SEC operates is it sometimes thinks in a very, and this isn't limited just to crypto, but it sometimes thinks in a very one-off way. And so, when I'm thinking about should a product, we're not a merit regulator, so we don't shouldn't be in the business of deciding whether something is good or bad. But an investor is thinking of the investor's entire portfolio, and sometimes we're thinking just in one-off terms, a particular product standing on its own, and we forget that people, are building portfolios. And so that, I think, sometimes makes it harder for us to look outside of the application that we're looking at and to see what else is going on. In this case, what else is going on is that there are other products that are sort of substitute exchange traded products, whether it's a company that has a lot of Bitcoin in its treasury, or whether it's another kind of product that's not available over on exchanges, but is available in some other way. And I think we do need to take that broader context into account.
You mentioned earlier that other countries may be kind of moving forward at a faster pace, introducing products that the U.S. has not yet approved or introduced. There's definitely countries in North America, so Canada being the kind of the great example. We also see some movement in South America, and then also in Europe. But the Asian region seems to be the one that people constantly pit the West versus the East. Any thoughts or kind of insights into what's been going on in China or some of the Asian markets and their kind of relationship with crypto, which frankly has been somewhat volatile. It seems like at some points they've embraced it, at other times they've really said, "Hey, we don't want Bitcoin here. We don't want Bitcoin mining here." And so, how do you view that situation, and does that play into it all? How you kind of evaluate Bitcoin and the regulatory environment here in the United States?
Well, we always have something to learn from how other people handle these kinds of things, these kinds of innovations. Whether that's a positive lesson or a negative lesson depends. And so I think we're always kind of watching. I'm concerned, of course. I want us to be the place where everyone wants to come to both innovate and invest. And so I want us to have the best set of rules, just because we do have the deepest and best capital markets in the world. And I think we should pair that with being the most welcoming to innovation. I think it's sometimes harder for a big market like this, and one that has really established rules, to turn on a dime and um, do something new. But we certainly have something to learn from places like Singapore. I think that have been a bit more forward thinking, and as you mentioned, Europe, I think, has been more forward thinking in some ways as well. I think what a lot of people are asking me for is just clarity. Give us clarity around what we can and can't do, whether that's around custody or around exchange traded products, or around the broader crypto questions about whether something is or is not being sold as a security.
Yeah, what's fascinating to me, I think, is when we start thinking about innovation. Regulation is a component of that. So is taxes. So is just the pure entrepreneurship, the investment that happens in these markets. One of the key differences in the market, let's say in kind of Bitcoin and the broader industry versus the traditional Wall Street world, is this asset trades 24/7, 365. There's an element of decentralization to it. And so, is it fair to ask regulators to evaluate what appears to be a different type of asset with some key different criteria to it with the same framework that they would look at a traditional asset? Or does it not really matter and it's just a financial asset? And you think that the same frameworks that we've always used kind of continue to apply here with an asset like Bitcoin?
Well, I think with exchange traded products, you can really build them with very different underlyings. And that's one of my areas of disagreement with my colleagues. I mean, they're looking below the exchange traded product, and they're looking to the Bitcoin markets, and they're saying, whoa, these markets look really different than the markets we're used to regulating. But I mean, certainly that's true with the gold markets too. Those aren't regulated in the same way the securities markets are. And so I think the beauty of exchange traded products is that you can take an asset that may trade very differently from our equities, and you can put it into a form that allows people to trade it in the accounts that they have alongside their equity portfolios. And I think that's a really valuable characteristic. That's why exchange traded products have been so successful.
We're talking here, based on your public comments at least, I think that you tend to be kind of more sympathetic to the Bitcoin view of the world in terms of what the Bitcoin community would like to see kind of happen in the United States and in the regulatory regime. Do you worry at all that if there's overregulation, or we're kind of slow to accept some of this, that there's kind of a doomsday scenario or a negative situation where the U.S. falls either one, too far behind, or two, we lose some sort of strategic advantage? Or is it a thing where just, we are the financial capital of the world? And so even if we're a little slow, you're optimistic that we can kind of catch up once we decide to go ahead and move forward and check all the boxes that regulators are looking for?
I mean, I always worry about us falling behind. I think we can't rest on our laurels. We are, we've got great markets here and we've got great innovators here. But part of the reason I wanted to be part of the commission was that I think we don't always handle innovation well, and the idea of being a place where people want to come and build things and do interesting things, that's really important. That's sort of the core of who we are as a country. We're a place where people try new things and they build interesting things, and that should always be what people think of when they think of the United States. I think it can be easy for a country like ours to become very focused on the rules and on making sure that that everything happens and no one gets hurt. And of course, that's a role that we as regulators play. We try to protect investors and prevent them from getting hurt. But I think one of the pieces of preventing investors from getting hurt is making sure that they have access to the full range of opportunities. You do actually hurt investors when you withhold opportunities from them. So I certainly do worry about that, and I certainly worry that there's some worrying statements, I think, coming out of DC around the idea that it's sort of the government's place to say yes, as opposed to people doing things. And then as the government looks at that, we try to put sensible regulations in place that allow people to make the choices they want to make and just build sensible protections around that. I really do think we have to bear in mind that the government is there to serve the people, and that's something that it's very easy for someone in a regulator's chair to sometimes forget.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what it sounds like you're basically saying is there is a view of the world, whether it's correct or not. If there's problems and a potential solution is out there, and folks don't have access to it, then that in some way would be hurting them as well. And so it's very dependent on almost the perspective that you take. But it sounds like your view really comes from a just give people access to kind of all rational options, and then allow them the choice to make as to kind of how to allocate their portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's certainly the right way to look at things. We do, we should view it as trying to give people the widest range of options possible. We have rules that we are going to apply, and we should apply them, fairly and equally across the board. And I should say, at the same time, if we're going to have this more open perspective, people need to be careful when they make decisions about what to buy, what to put in their portfolio. They need to be thinking about it and realizing that you can lose money. And that's a message I always try to give to people is, when you use your money to buy anything, you need to be careful and think about whether it's money you can afford to lose, and think about your risk tolerance, think about your other needs. So that's it. With freedom, of course, comes responsibility.
So hearing you say that as a SEC commissioner makes sense, I think, to a lot of folks who come from the financial world, who are pretty well versed in investing. But we've seen a recent surge in interest in young people in investing in various markets, not just in Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, but also in the stock market, et cetera. How does financial education play into this? And if you even kind of take it further into like accreditation laws and stuff like that, just how do you think through what is the responsibility of kind of the market participants versus maybe a regulatory body versus our school systems or anything like that around financial education?
Well, I think no one would argue against having more financial education in the schools. I think I love to see kids starting much younger, getting to know about the financial system, about opportunities in the financial markets to build their retirement portfolios and so forth, but also about opportunities for them to participate in that sector. I think it's wonderful that retail investors are showing an interest in participating in the equity markets. Of course, they have to be careful, and of course, they have to realize that they can lose money. And so that needs to be part of what the investor education is out there. We do have a website, investor.gov, that people can go to, and that has lots of good information on there. But what I think that we've done wrong at the SEC is that we've taken the view that maybe we should stand in for investors and make some decisions for them. And that's where you get rules like the accredited investor rules that say, you know what, if you're not wealthy, we're going to assume that you're not sophisticated and that you can't make these investment decisions for yourselves. I'd like to see us be much more willing to let people prove that they have taken that community college course that enables them to make wise decisions, or that they've taken other steps that indicate that they're ready and interested to invest in the markets, in the private markets. And so I would love us to have a much more open door approach. I think there's something really un-American about telling people, no, we've decided that you can't participate in these particular markets. That said, I also get a lot of people who, when they do lose money, they come to me and they say, well, wait, I lost money and I want you to do something about it. And so my message is always two-sided. It's, hey, I want the door to be open for you to do with your hard-earned money what you want to do. But at the same time, if you make a mistake, take that as a learning experience for the next time, and really do your research and make sure that you know what you're getting into. So it's kind of a two-sided thing, but I really think the SEC needs to be careful to avoid falling into the trap of becoming a merit regulator, because we as regulators can't know what's best for every American.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear you, because really what it's talking about is almost a merit-based test, right? If you can pass a test, whatever that ends up being, whatever the education needed to get to that point. But if you're able to prove that you're educated, you understand risk, you should be allowed to participate in the market just like anybody else. Is that a fair kind of qualification of how you think about it?
Well, I mean, I've been pretty open about the fact that I think the accredited investor approach, having that standard in place, is not a great standard. I don't think that people should have to prove things to us, but I'm also a realist. And in Washington, I think there are not that many people who think the way I do, but I think we should think about careful ways to open the door, which would not only be good from my perspective, but I think would be acceptable to other regulators in DC, to say, look, we understand you have these investor protection concerns, and so here's a way we can address those concerns. I tend to be much more of the view that, people should be able to make their own decisions with their hard-earned money, but I don't think we're likely to go there anytime soon.
I unfortunately agree with you. We were talking earlier about kind of the individual investor or the retail market and their relationship with Bitcoin. There's also been obviously corporations that have started to enter into the space, and some of them are building products in the Bitcoin market and kind of driving revenue through it. Others are creating financial products that folks can invest into, but some of them are just buying Bitcoin themselves and putting it in their treasury. How do you think about kind of the actual purchasing of Bitcoin by corporations and putting that on their treasury? That's something that 12 months ago, if we were having this conversation, hadn't happened yet in the public market. And so, is that something that the SEC is looking at? Does that seem to be just kind of a normal practice of companies being able to put whatever they want in their treasury around financial assets, or just how do you see that?
Well, I'm going to fall back on what I was saying before. I'm not a believer in merit regulation, and so I don't think we should tell companies how to run themselves. I do think that we have a role to play in making sure that investors are getting good disclosures, and so making sure that companies are telling investors what they're doing. And so, to me, that's what it really comes down to. Are you being upfront with investors about what your plan is and what you're doing? But I don't want to get in the business of running companies.
Along those lines, I think a lot about the adoption of Bitcoin being kind of the individual and then organizations. So both financial institutions and corporations, and then the kind of that last bucket of adoption really being nation states or central banks. A few weeks ago, obviously El Salvador came out and spoke about making Bitcoin legal tender. Not necessarily what is your thought in terms of that country's decision, but how do you see just nation states in general, kind of these larger bodies or larger organizations starting to play in the market? Does that change the way that a regulatory body inside the United States looks at the asset? Or do you kind of fall back still to just it shouldn't really matter necessarily what other people are doing? The asset is the asset, and we should just underwrite that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's our um, place to really judge that kind of thing. But again, I think it just plays into if you have institutions and nations using an asset, it's likely that the markets for that asset are going to become more mature. And I think that then plays into answering some of the questions that the staff had, for example, in considering these Bitcoin exchange traded products. So I think that's where it sort of intersects with what we do at the SEC.
Got it. And then the last question I have for you is just around how folks who are either listening to this or folks in the private market, corporations, or financial institutions, how can they help the SEC, whether it's from an education perspective or actions that they take, or how do you see them kind of interfacing or interacting with you and the rest of your fellow commissioners?
Well, I certainly love it when people come and talk to me. I am always in need of learning more, and so I appreciate people who are willing to take the time to educate me. And I think that that's true of my colleagues too, both on the commission and on the staff. It's always helpful to get education from people who are spending all of their time in this industry. So please do inform us, educate us. I know it can be time consuming, but we really do greatly appreciate that. And I think that will help us to be better regulators of the space. Unfortunately, as we started out talking about, we do lots of different things. And so it can be really easy to fall prey to just reading the headlines. And the headlines are on this topic are often not positive headlines. And so, make sure that you're giving us the rest of the story and that you're telling us the really exciting things that are happening in this space too. I think sometimes it's so easy to focus on the negative that we forget the really positive um, possibilities and realities around crypto.
There were many bad things said about the internet 20, 25 years ago. So that turned out okay. I think that hopefully the narrative will change over time. What would be your best suggestion for folks who do want to reach out, help educate you or your colleagues? Where can they do this? Or a website that you want to send them to, or some other destination?
Well, if they want to talk to the staff, they should go through FinHub. There's a page on our website that provides contact info for FinHub, and then come to me, Commissioner Peirce at sec.gov. I really do welcome the chance to talk to people, so please take me up on that.
Awesome. Well, Commissioner, thank you so much for your time today. I think most people in the Bitcoin community really appreciate your kind of rational view of the world and your constant kind of advocacy for the view of having Bitcoin treated as the rest of the financial assets are. And so we will definitely have to continue to watch as you continue your work.
Thanks so much, Pomp. I really enjoyed this.